The galaxy was vast, filled with countless civilizations, each fighting for survival in its own way. Some built great empires, others hid in the shadows, and some, like the Velari, had once been mighty but were now on the edge of extinction. The Velari were a peaceful race, known for their wisdom and advanced culture. Long ago, they had been one of the leading members of the Galactic Council, an alliance of powerful species that governed the affairs of the galaxy. But time had changed everything. The Velari had grown weak, their influence fading. When the Xaranok, a brutal and warlike species, launched an invasion of their homeworld, Zeros, the Velari pleaded for help. The Council, however, did nothing. To them, the Velari were a lost cause. Their military was too weak, and their planet had little strategic value. The Council claimed that interfering would cause unnecessary conflict. One by one, the great civilizations of the galaxy turned their backs on the Velari. No fleets came to defend them. No armies landed to stand by their side. The once mighty race was abandoned, left to face the Xaranok alone. As the invasion continued, the Velari sent out their final distress signal, a desperate message that traveled across the stars, searching for anyone who would listen. That message reached Earth. On a small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy, humanity had only recently stepped into the great unknown. Earth was not as advanced as the older civilizations, nor as powerful. To the Council, humanity was young, reckless, and unimportant. But humans had something that many species had lost over time, a fire that refused to die. When the distress call arrived, Earth's leaders gathered. They listened as the voice of a Velari elder, weak and full of sorrow, begged for help. They saw the images of burning cities, helpless civilians, and the brutal destruction caused by the Xaranok. The Council's response had been clear: do not interfere. But for humanity, this was not a question of politics. It was a question of what was right. Are we really going to sit back and watch an entire race die? One commander asked. If we go, we will be alone, a politician warned. We have to go, a young soldier said firmly. If we don't, then who will? The debate did not last long. Humanity had made its choice. Within days, volunteers from across Earth stepped forward. Soldiers, engineers, medics, and pilots. They called themselves the Bastion Armada, a force not of conquest, but of defense. Their fleet was smaller than those of the great galactic empires, their weapons less advanced. But they had something far greater, a will to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. As the fleet prepared for departure, Captain Elias Vance stood on the bridge of the Horizon Spear, one of humanity's most advanced warships. He looked at the thousands of people ready to leave their homeworld behind to fight for strangers. This isn't our war, his second-in-command, Lieutenant Mirasolis, said quietly. Vance nodded. No, it's not. But if we don't fight, then it means we've become like the rest of the galaxy. And I won't let that happen. With a final command, the human fleet left Earth's orbit, heading toward the distant world of Zeros. A war awaited them. The enemy was stronger. The odds were against them. But humanity did not turn away. They were coming, and they would fight. For the abandoned, for the forgotten, for the Velari. The Bastion Armada moved through the cold void of space, its fleet of warships cutting through the darkness like silent warriors. Thousands of humans, from experienced soldiers to eager volunteers, stood ready for battle. They had left Earth behind, knowing that what lay ahead was not just a war, but a fight for something greater. The fight for a forgotten people. Captain Elias Vance sat in his command chair aboard the Horizon Spear, Earth's flagship. The Velari distress call echoed in his mind. Every day, those voices of desperation drove him forward. The Council had abandoned them. The great empires had turned their backs. But humanity would not. As the fleet neared Zeros, the command center buzzed with tension. Lieutenant Mirasolis, his second-in-command, studied the incoming reports. Captain, we'll enter the system in 2 hours. Long-range scanners show Tarnak ships in orbit. Vance leaned forward. Numbers. Mira's expression hardened. At least 30 warships. Heavy destroyers. Fast attack cruisers. They outgun us 3-1. A low murmur ran through the command crew. The Xarnak were feared across the galaxy for their brutality. Their warships were stronger, their weapons deadlier. Even with all of Earth's courage, this was a fight they might not win. Vance took a deep breath. Fear was natural. Giving up was not. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," he said, his voice calm. "We came to fight, and that's exactly what we're going to do." He turned to the comms officer. "Send a message to the fleet. Prepare for battle." As the humans advanced, a new signal flashed across their screens, an urgent transmission from the Galactic Council. A holographic image appeared on the main screen, showing Ambassador Rylos, a high-ranking council member. His blue skin and narrow eyes gave him an almost regal appearance, but his face was filled with frustration. "Captain Vance," Rylos said sharply, "this is an official order from the Galactic Council. Your fleet must turn back immediately. This war is not yours to fight." Vance didn't flinch. The Velari called for help. "We're answering." "The Council has already ruled on this matter," Rylos snapped. "The Xarnak are too powerful. We cannot afford a conflict with them." Vance's hands tightened into fists. "We?" He almost laughed. "You mean you won't fight? But we will." "You are making a mistake," Rylos warned. "If you continue, the Council will not protect you. You will stand alone." Vance met his gaze without hesitation. "We already knew that." He cut the transmission. The fleet would not stop. Humanity would not turn away. As the Bastion Armada reached Zeros, a terrible sight unfolded before them. The planet, once a thriving world of golden cities and green landscapes, was now a burning battlefield. Smoke and fire covered the surface. The last of the Velari forces struggled to defend their cities, but they were losing. Above them, Tarnak warships hung in orbit like predators circling a wounded prey. Captain Vance rose from his seat. "All ships, attack." The human fleet surged forward, breaking formation as smaller fighters weaved between the larger ships. Missiles and energy blasts tore through the darkness, lighting up space with deadly flashes. The Xarnak were caught off guard. They had expected no reinforcements. Their fleet scrambled to reposition as the first wave of human ships crashed into them. The Horizon Spear unleashed its forward cannons, tearing through the nearest enemy cruiser. The explosion sent debris flying into space. On the surface, the Velari had given up hope. Their warriors fought with fading strength, expecting death at any moment. Then, out of nowhere, the sky burned with falling ships. But these were not Sarnak. They were human dropships. Velari civilians looked up, confused and afraid. Then they heard something they had never expected, a voice in their language, coming from the strange metal vessels. "Hold the line. Help has arrived." From the dropships, armored human soldiers stormed out, weapons blazing. They moved fast, taking cover, laying down fire, and pushing the enemy back. The Velari stared in disbelief. No one had come to save them before. But now, against all odds, these strangers from a distant world had come to fight for them. For the first time in years, the Velari felt something they had almost forgotten: hope. The battle had begun. The odds were against them. The enemy was stronger. But the humans would not break. They had come to do what no one else would, and they would not fail. The skies above Zeros were filled with fire. The human fleet clashed against the mighty Xarnak warships, exchanging relentless barrages of weapons fire. Explosions lit up the void, debris scattering in all directions as ships from both sides were torn apart. On the surface, chaos ruled. The Velari cities, once shining with golden towers and flowing rivers, were now battlefields covered in smoke and destruction. The last remnants of the Velari defense forces fought desperately, but their numbers were too few. Until now. From above, human dropships rained down like falling stars, their thrusters burning as they landed in the middle of the war-torn streets. Hatches burst open, and human soldiers stormed out, weapons raised, moving with practiced precision. For the first time in this war, the Villari were not alone. Captain Ilias Vance stood inside the command center of the Horizon Spear, gripping the side of the Holodomel as battle reports came in. On the screen, red enemy markers swarmed over zeros, but blue dots, human forces, had finally entered the fight. "The ground teams have landed," reported Lieutenant Mirasolis, her voice sharp with focus. "They're engaging Karnak forces across the city. Civilians are being evacuated." Vance nodded. "Good. Keep them covered from orbit. We hold the skies, or this mission is over." Outside, human fighters weaved between the larger battleships, dodging enemy fire as they launched precise strikes at the Karnak fleet. The enemy was larger, stronger, but humans fought with strategy, adaptability, and pure determination. Vance turned to the weapons officer. "Bring the spear forward. Target their command ship. If we cut off the head, the body will fall." The Horizon Spear's massive thrusters flared as the ship moved into battle. Its forward cannons unleashed a powerful barrage, hammering into the Karnak flagship. The enemy vessel shook from the impact, its shields flickering. The Karnak did not expect humans to fight like this, but humanity was full of surprises. On the surface, Sergeant Daniel Rains led his squad through the ruins of a Villari district. The air smelled of smoke and burning metal. The sky was filled with flashes of explosions from the battle above. The Villari civilians hid in shattered buildings, fear in their glowing silver eyes. They had never seen humans before, only heard stories from the council. But now, these strange warriors had come from the stars, fighting for them. Rains turned to his squad. "Secure this sector. Move fast, move smart." The Karnak had already noticed them. Large, hulking warriors in dark armor stormed through the streets, growling in their deep, guttural language. They were used to fighting weak opponents, races who surrendered easily. But humans were different. Rains raised his rifle. "Light 'em up." Gunfire erupted as the human soldiers took cover behind debris, unleashing precise, disciplined shots. The Karnak roared in fury, charging forward with brute strength. But brute strength meant nothing against strategy and teamwork. The humans moved as one, flanking, covering each other, using the environment to their advantage. They were outnumbered but not outmatched. One by one, the Karnak warriors fell, their massive bodies crashing to the ground. The Villari, watching from the shadows, could not believe their eyes. For years, they had been told by the council that the Karnak were unstoppable. But these humans, these warriors from a distant world, were proving otherwise. Back in orbit, the Horizon Spear was locked in a deadly duel with the Karnak command ship. The enemy vessel had finally recovered from the first strike and was now retaliating with full force. Energy cannons fired in rapid succession, shaking the human flagship. Vance gritted his teeth as the ship's warning lights flashed red. "Shields at 30%. A crew member shouted. Mira glanced at him. "We won't last much longer." Vance narrowed his eyes. They needed to finish this. Now. Target their engines. Fire everything we have. The Horizon Spear unleashed its full firepower, launching a devastating barrage of missiles and high-energy rounds. The projectiles tore through the enemy ship's engines, sending a chain reaction of explosions across its hull. Inside the Karnak vessel, chaos erupted. Without engines, without command, their fleet began to falter. Seeing this, the human forces on the ground pushed forward, and for the first time in this war, the Karnak began to fall back. As the sun rose over the battlefield, the Villari stood among the ruins of their once beautiful city, watching in silence. The humans had not only come, but they had fought with everything they had. One Villari elder, weak from age and sorrow, stepped forward. He looked at Sergeant Rains, at the human soldiers standing beside him, weapons lowered, their faces covered in dirt and sweat. His voice trembled. Why? Rains looked around at the destruction, the bodies of fallen enemies, and the soldiers who had given their lives. He took a deep breath and answered simply, because no one else would. The battle was not over. The war was far from won. But for the first time in years, Zeros was no longer alone, and neither were the Velari. The battle for Zeros was far from over. The Xaranok had suffered losses, but they were not defeated. In the cold vacuum of space, their damaged fleet retreated beyond the planet's orbit, regrouping like wounded predators. On the ground, the human soldiers and Velari survivors stood among the ruins of the burning city. The air was thick with smoke, the scent of fire and destruction still lingering. The first battle had been won, but at a cost. Captain Ilias Vance stood on the bridge of the Horizon Spear, watching the enemy fleet's movements through the holographic display. He could see their patterns. They weren't running away. They're waiting, Lieutenant Mirasolis said beside him. They want reinforcements. Vance nodded grimly. More Xaranok ships would come. The first wave had been just an occupation force. The real war would begin soon. He turned to the communications officer. Get me a status report on our fleet. The officer checked the readings. We lost 3 ships. Several others are badly damaged. We still hold orbit, but if the Xaranok come back in full force... He hesitated. Vance knew what he meant. They couldn't win a prolonged war. But they weren't leaving. Down in the war-torn streets, Sergeant Daniel Rains and his squad moved through the rubble, securing the area. Velari civilians emerged from hiding places, some injured, others afraid. A young Velari child, her silver eyes wide, clung to her mother as she stared at the human soldiers. They looked so different, so strange, yet they had saved them. One of Rains's men, Corporal Jace Carter, knelt down, offering the child a small ration bar. Here, kid, you must be hungry. The mother hesitated before gently taking it. You are not like the others, she whispered. Rains exhaled. No, we're not. The Velari elder, the same one who had questioned them before, approached. His gaze was filled with both gratitude and sadness. Your people have done what the Great Council refused to do. You saved us. Rains shook his head. We're not done yet. The elder's expression darkened. Then you must know, the Xaranok never forgive. If you fight them, they will never stop hunting you. Rains looked at the sky, where distant flashes of battle still burned. He already knew that. But humanity had made its choice. Back in orbit, an urgent signal reached the Horizon Spear. Captain, the communications officer called out. Incoming transmission from the Galactic Council. Vance sighed. Put it through. The holographic screen flickered to life, revealing Ambassador Rylos once again. His blue skin looked paler than before, his expression filled with frustration. Captain Vance, Rylos began coldly. You have defied the orders of the Council. Vance crossed his arms. The Council abandoned the Velari. We didn't. Rylos' eyes narrowed. You don't understand what you've done. By attacking the Xaranok, you have provoked them. The Council cannot protect you. Vance let out a dry laugh. You never intended to protect us. The ambassador hesitated, then sighed. This is your last warning. Withdraw immediately. If you do, we may be able to negotiate peace with the Xaranok. Vance's expression hardened. There's no peace with monsters. Rylos looked at him with something almost like pity. Then you are truly alone. The transmission cut. A heavy silence fell over the bridge. Mira exhaled. So that's it. The Council is done with us. Vance gave a small, grim smile. No, we're done with them. That night, on the surface of Zeros, the human soldiers and Velari civilians gathered in the ruins of what had once been a grand Velari hall. Fires burned in the distance, but for the first time, hope flickered alongside them. Sergeant Rains sat near one of the makeshift barricades, his rifle resting against the broken stone. His squad was scattered around, tending to the wounded and keeping watch for any signs of enemy movement. The Velari elder sat beside him. "You have lost many of your own in our defense." Rains nodded. "War always has a cost." The elder studied him carefully. "And yet you fight not for conquest, not for power. Why?" Rains looked at the darkened sky. "Why? Because they were human. Because no one else would. Because if they turned away, then they would be no better than the ones who had abandoned the Velari." He looked back at the elder and answered simply, "Because it's the right thing to do." A deep rumble shook the ground. In the distance, red lights burned in the night sky. Aranok reinforcements arriving in full force. The next battle was coming. But this time, the Velari were not alone. And humanity would not back down. The night sky over Zeros was no longer dark. It burned red with the arrival of the Aranok reinforcements. Their warships descended like a falling storm, their engines roaring as they took position in orbit. On the ground, Sergeant Daniel Rains and his squad watched from the ruins of a Velari stronghold. Fires crackled around them, casting long shadows on the broken walls. The Velari survivors huddled together, fear in their silver eyes. One Velari child clutched his mother's arm. "Are they coming back?" he whispered. Rains tightened his grip on his rifle. He didn't need to answer. The sky had already told them the truth. The Aranok were not finished. Aboard the Horizon Spear, Captain Ilias Vance stood before the massive holotable, his face set in stone. The enemy fleet was nearly 3 times larger than the first wave. Lieutenant Mira Solis studied the readings, her jaw tight. "They're deploying ground troops." Vance nodded grimly. "They want to wipe out any resistance." Mira hesitated. "We're outnumbered, Captain. We should consider evacuation." Vance exhaled. Retreat was not an option. The Velari had no escape ships. If humanity left now, the Aranok would destroy them all. His fingers curled into fists. "No, we stand." Mira gave him a sharp nod. There was no turning back now. Vance turned to his crew. "Send a message to the fleet. All ships, hold the line." As the enemy dropships roared through the sky, human soldiers and Velari warriors took position in the ruined city. Sergeant Rains crouched behind cover, checking his ammunition. His squad spread out around him, weapons ready. The Velari fighters, though weak and exhausted, stood beside them. For the first time in their history, humans and Velari would fight together. A deep, bone-rattling roar echoed through the ruins. The Aranok war cries. Then, the battle began. From the shadows of the broken city, massive Aranok warriors charged, their heavy armor glinting under the fire-lit sky. Their weapons hummed with energy, cutting through the darkness as they opened fire. The first wave crashed into the human and Velari defense lines like a tidal wave. Rains fired his rifle in controlled bursts, taking down one enemy after another. His squad fought with precision, ducking, moving, covering each other. The Velari, though untrained in modern warfare, fought with desperate fury. A Aranok warrior lunged at Rains, its massive claws swinging toward him. He barely rolled away in time. Before the creature could recover, a Velari fighter leaped onto its back, driving a plasma blade into its neck. The beast collapsed with a roar. Rains locked eyes with the Velari warrior. For a brief moment, there was understanding. They were no longer just allies. They were brothers in arms. In orbit, the battle raged on. The Horizon Spear shook violently as enemy fire slammed into its hull. The shields flickered dangerously. "We can't take much more of this," Mira shouted. Vance gritted his teeth. They needed an edge. He turned to the weapons officer. "Target their command ship. Overload the main cannons." The officer hesitated. "That much power could damage our systems." "Do it." The ship's massive guns powered up, energy crackling along their barrels. Then, with a deafening blast, they fired. The explosion engulfed the Xarnock command ship, sending shockwaves through the enemy fleet. For a moment, just a moment, the enemy hesitated. And in war, a moment can change everything. On the surface, the human and Velari forces fought desperately. Their defenses were breaking. A Xarnock warlord, towering over the battlefield, marched forward, his armor thick with battle scars. He raised his massive blade and bellowed in challenge. Sergeant Rains stepped forward. He did not run. He did not back down. The warlord lunged. Rains dodged, rolling beneath the creature's strike. He raised his rifle and fired point-blank into its exposed side. The bullets sparked against its armor, but one shot found a weak spot. The warlord staggered, then collapsed. Silence fell over the battlefield. And then the Xarnock broke. They had expected an easy slaughter. They had not expected humanity. As their forces retreated, a roar of victory rose from the Velari and human fighters. They had won. For now. Back aboard the Horizon Spear, Captain Vance watched as the Xarnock fleet pulled away, disappearing into the void. Mira stood beside him. They'll be back. Vance nodded. And we'll be ready. Below, in the ruins of Zeros, Sergeant Rains looked at the Velari survivors. They were no longer just refugees. They were warriors. And for the first time in their history, they were not alone. The fires of battle still burned across Zeros, but for the first time in a long while, the Velari had hope. The Xarnock had retreated. Their warships had vanished into the void, leaving behind only wreckage and the echoes of their defeated roars. But everyone knew the war was far from over. On the ruined streets, Sergeant Daniel Rains and his squad walked among the survivors. Velari civilians stepped out from hiding, their silver eyes filled with uncertainty. They had suffered greatly, homes lost, families torn apart. But they were alive, and that meant something. A young Velari girl ran to Rains and hugged his leg. The soldier froze for a moment, surprised. He had fought in many battles, but this simple gesture felt heavier than all of them. The child's mother bowed her head. "You saved us," she whispered. Rains exhaled, glancing around at the wounded soldiers, the broken buildings, and the bodies of the fallen. Was this victory? Aboard the Horizon Spear, Captain Ilias Vance stood in the command center, watching the aftermath through the large display screen. The battle had cost them dearly. Lieutenant Mira Solis approached, holding a datapad. "Casualty reports," she said softly. Vance took it without a word. He scanned the list. Too many names. Too many losses. But war had no mercy. He set the pad down. "What's the status of our fleet?" Mira crossed her arms. 3 ships are completely destroyed. The rest are damaged, but still operational. Vance nodded. "And the Xarnock?" She pulled up the latest reports. Scouts tracked their fleet moving toward the outer systems. They're regrouping. Vance's jaw tightened. He had expected this. The Xarnock never forgot, never forgave. And they would come back, stronger, angrier. "We don't have much time," he muttered. Mira hesitated. "Captain, we can't fight them alone forever. We need allies." Vance knew she was right, but the Galactic Council had already abandoned them. They had only one choice. They had to prepare the Velari for war. Deep inside the Velari ruins, in an underground hall that had once been a grand chamber, the remaining Velari leaders gathered. Sergeant Rains stood with his squad, weapons lowered but always alert. These people were no longer just civilians. They had seen war, suffered under oppression, and now they had a chance to fight back. The Velari elder, his silver robes stained with dust and blood, looked at the humans. His voice was weary, but strong. "You have given us our freedom," he said. "But freedom means nothing if we cannot defend it." Rains nodded. "Then we train. We fight." The elder studied him. "We are not warriors like you. We have never been." Rains took a slow breath, then looked at his squad, at soldiers who had fought battles across the galaxy. "You weren't warriors yesterday," he said, "but tomorrow you will be." The room fell silent. Then a young Velari woman, her eyes hardened by the loss of her family, stepped forward. She picked up a fallen Tarnak weapon from the ground. "I will fight," she said. Another Velari followed, then another. One by one, they stood. The Velari had been victims for too long. Now, they would be warriors, and humanity would teach them. Over the next few weeks, the ruins of Zeros became something new. Human soldiers trained Velari recruits, teaching them how to hold a weapon, how to fight, how to stand together. It was not easy. Many of them had never fought before, had never even held a gun. But determination burned in their eyes. Sergeant Rains stood in a field outside the city, watching as a group of Velari took turns firing at makeshift targets. One of them, the young woman who had first stepped forward, missed her shot. She growled in frustration. Rains walked over. "Take a breath," he said. "Don't just shoot. Feel the weapon. Control it." She exhaled, steadying her grip. She fired again. This time, she hit the target. Rains gave a small nod. She was learning. They all were. In orbit, aboard the Horizon Spear, Captain Vance watched as supply ships moved between the surviving human vessels. Engineers worked day and night to repair damaged hulls. Every moment counted. Mira approached. "Intel reports say the Xarnak are preparing another invasion force." Vance didn't look away from the screen. "How long?" "Maybe a few weeks. Maybe less." Vance exhaled slowly. Not enough time. But they would fight with what they had. Because that's what humans did. Late at night, as the stars shined dimly over Zeros, Rains sat by a small fire with some of his men. The Velari woman he had trained sat across from him, cleaning her newly assigned rifle. She looked at him. "Do you think we have a chance?" Rains met her gaze. "No," he said honestly. "We don't have a chance." She frowned, confused. "Then why are we fighting?" Rains stared into the flames. "Because they think we don't." The Xarnak believed the Velari were weak, that humanity was alone, that they would break. But they were wrong. Because the next time the Xarnak returned, they wouldn't just be fighting humans. They would be fighting an army. And they would learn what it meant to stand against those who refused to fall. The sky over Zeros burned once more. The Xarnak had returned. Their massive warships hung in orbit, blocking the stars. Thunderous explosions echoed as their cannons fired, shaking the ground below. The invasion had begun. But this time, Zeros was not defenseless. On the ruined city walls, human soldiers and Velari warriors stood side by side. Their weapons were ready. Their hearts were strong. They would not run. They would not surrender. This was their home now, and they would fight for it. Aboard the Horizon Spear, Captain Ilias Vance watched the enemy fleet from the command deck. The Xarnak had come with everything they had: warships, ground troops, and heavy assault units. Lieutenant Mira Solis studied the readings, her voice steady but tense. "We're outnumbered 5-1. Vance's grip tightened on the console. "Then we make every shot count." He turned to the weapons officer. "Target their carriers. Cut off their reinforcements." The ship's cannons roared, firing a barrage of energy blasts at the incoming fleet. Explosions bloomed in space, but the Xarnak kept coming. Vance exhaled. They had to hold. On the ground, the battle erupted. Xarnak dropships landed outside the city, releasing waves of armored warriors. Their battle cries filled the air as they charged. Sergeant Daniel Rains took cover behind a barricade, firing his rifle in controlled bursts. His squad fought beside him. But this time, they were not alone. The Velari warriors, once a peaceful race, had become soldiers. They moved in formation, covering each other, using the tactics they had learned from the humans. A Xarnak beast lunged at Rains, its massive blade swinging toward him. Before it could strike, A Velari warrior leaped forward, slashing its throat with a plasma dagger. The creature collapsed, its lifeless body hitting the dirt. Rains met the Velari fighter's eyes. There was no fear in them, only determination. The battle raged on. The Xarnok pushed forward, their brute strength overwhelming the defenses. The humans and Velari fought with everything they had, but they were being pushed back. High above, the horizon spear trembled as enemy fire tore through its shields. Sparks rained from the ceiling as warning sirens blared. Mira wiped blood from her forehead. "Captain, we can't hold much longer." Vance clenched his jaw. If they fell, the ground forces would be doomed. But then, a transmission came through. A new voice crackled over the speakers. "This is Admiral Carson of the Terran Defense Fleet. Hold the line. Help is on the way." Mira's eyes widened. They came. Vance's lips curled into a rare smile. Took them long enough. Human reinforcements had arrived. From hyperspace, a fleet of Terran warships appeared, engines roaring as they engaged the Xarnok head-on. Heavy cannons fired, missiles streaked across the sky, and in a matter of minutes, the tide began to turn. On the ground, Rain saw the enemy hesitate for the first time. The Xarnok did not expect this. "They're breaking," one of his soldiers shouted. Rains grabbed his communicator. "All units, push forward." With a unified roar, the humans and Velari charge. The battlefield became chaos. Plasma blasts, roaring warriors, explosions shaking the earth. And then, the Xarnok command ship exploded in the sky. The enemy forces froze. Their leader was gone. Their fleet was falling apart. Panic spread among them. They started to retreat. Rain stood in the center of the battlefield, breathing heavily. It was over. They had won. Hours later, as the sun began to rise over Zeros, the survivors gathered. Captain Vance, Mira, Rains, and the Velari leaders stood together, looking at what remained of the battlefield. The Velari elder, his voice filled with gratitude, spoke softly. "We were abandoned by the galaxy, but you stood with us." Vance nodded, "Because that's what humanity does." Rains looked at the young Velari warriors, their weapons still in their hands. They had been refugees once. Now, they were soldiers, survivors, defenders of their home. Mira smiled. "The Xarnok won't forget this." Vance smirked. "Good. Let them remember what happened here." Because today, on this distant world, the galaxy had learned a lesson. Humanity did not abandon its allies. And when the universe turned its back on the weak, humanity stood and fought and won. The end.